They're just pressing the same two buttons. They're hacking. They're useless to their alliance. They just want to farm AP. If you spend any amount of time in Cyrodiil, or even on the ESO forums, you'll have seen people complaining about ball groups. And odds are that, even as an occasional PvPer, you might have run into a ball group yourself and complained about it. Back in the dark past where I was still exclusively a solo duo player, I also complained about ball groups myself. I didn't find it fun to engage with them, and I thought they wasted people's time. But over the years, I've come to play with many different groups, some of which ball groups, and I now understand and respect their place in the Cyrodiil ecosystem much more than before. Playing in different group compositions gave me a lot of insight not only into how ball groups work, but also into what it's like to fight against them and how the different player bases perceive each other. Oftentimes the ball group players and, for lack of a better term, more casual PvP players exist in segregation, rarely interacting with one another due to a mutual lack of trust and or respect. This video aims to give you an idea of what a ball group is and what makes it so strong. I also want to shine a light on some of the preconceived notions people have about ball groups and the players who participate in them. Before we delve into things, I will point out that I have played in several ball groups on PCEU, but mostly as a healer. I've played other support roles and damage roles occasionally, and I know their basics, but my main expertise is with healing. So if you spot gaps in my knowledge on the offensive side of ball group gameplay, that'll be why. Before delving into a topic, it's important to define it. If this were a mediocre PowerPoint presentation, I could simply lift a definition from Merriam-Webster and call it a day. But we are not, and I doubt that a renowned dictionary concerns itself too much with MMO jargon. Instead, I will give my own definition of a ball group. There's no set definition, and you may get different answers based on whom you ask. But these are the boxes I think you should tick in order to be considered a ball group. First, the group has to be between 7 and 12 players in size. If you're below that number, you're probably either a small scale or a mini ball. If you're above that number, you're a Zerg. There's a good argument to be made that some 12-man ball groups already approach Zerg territory, but more on that later. Second, all members in the group need to have adjusted their builds entirely to facilitate group play and to complement the other players in their specific group. Each member has a specific role to play in the group, whether it's dealing damage, healing, or providing speed buffs. On Ravenwatch, groups will often run a dedicated purger as well. Third, there has to be a high degree of coordination in using these group skills to kill enemy groups. Damage comes from synced AoE based skills such as Deep Fissure and Proximity Detonation, and from skills such as Steel Tornado, Impulse, or Damage synergies. Ultimates are also used in concert with each other. Fourth, the group's main survivability has to come from the stacking of heals, primarily heal over time abilities such as Echoing Vigor and Rapid Regeneration. This is commonly referred to as cross-healing, the sharing and stacking of healing responsibilities between the entire group, which includes the damage dealers, supports, and of course the dedicated healers. Fifth and finally, the group has to move as one. Everyone moves with the raid leader, dispersing only when being pushed by an enemy ball group. From a distance, this makes them appear to move across the battlefield as a ball of AoEs and HOTS, hence the name ball group. This is the most accurate definition of a ball group that I can come up with. There will always be groups that might challenge the confines of this definition, but at the very least it should be a good definition to work with for the rest of this video. Now that we know what a ball group is, we can move on to the question of why they are the way they are. Why are they composed like that? Why do they run like they do? The most straightforward answer to this question is that a ball group is simply the logical conclusion of optimized group play. I want to avoid using the word meta here, as you can have an entirely separate video about what that word actually means, but if you would start a group in Cyrodiil completely from scratch and keep tweaking it for improvement based on data and experience, odds are you'll either become a ball group or at least adopt some of its core principles and tactics. If you permit me a little pretentious trip into the realm beyond gaming, we can compare this to a phenomenon in nature known as convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is a process whereby wildly different species may evolve to develop similar features when faced with similar challenges in their environment. This is why a shark has a body that is comparable with that of a dolphin, despite one being a fish and the other being a mammal. And in turn, both of them look like ichthyosaurs, despite those being reptiles who went extinct millions of years ago. In short, the shape that we associate with fish keeps recurring in marine life because it's an advantageous shape to have in that environment. Applying this principle to serial group play, and trust me, I'm aware that this all sounds a bit out there, you could say that ball groups and adjacent PvP groups keep emerging in Cyrodiil because it has proven to be an effective way to play in that environment. I have been part of different projects that started out as small scales or even just a bunch of decently skilled solo players teaming up without making any adjustments to their builds. Over time, we would always face the same problem, that we could take on casual players without too much trouble, but we would never stand a chance against other organized groups where the players complement each other. They could funnel more damage into a short window of time while mustering much more robust defenses, and against huge zergs, our sustain and defenses had a bigger chance to stretch thin. The more you take action to solve these problems, the closer you will get to ball group territory. That's not to say every competent PvP group turns into a fully fledged ball group. In my view, there are two common ways that the higher end groups go. Either they fully lean into group play, start using Echoing Vigor, Radiating Regeneration, Steel Tornado and other AoE skills, or they build themselves really tanky and use skills like Resolving Vigor, Dizzying Swing and Polar Wind to do damage and stay alive. But even this second category of groups will often resort to some of the tactics commonly associated with ball groups. They tend to stay close together, they sync skills such as Deep Fissure, and they coordinate their ultimates. They may also use some support sets to buff one another. The main way to tell these groups apart is their size. Ball groups are typically larger, like I said before, 7 to 12 people. Whereas these tanky groups are small scales of maybe 3 to 5 people. There are also mini-balls, which are groups of anywhere between 3 and 6 players who use the same tactics as a ball group, but with fewer people. They might prioritize some different sets and skills to compensate for their limited numbers, but the principles are the exact same. In the end, you could separate these groups into yellow vigor groups, which are AoE based, and green vigor groups, which are tanky. But both share a lot of traits in the way they build and play. The reason I'm explaining this is to illustrate that there is a finite amount of options when you try to excel in group play. You'd be hard pressed to optimize your PvP group and not share anything in common with a ball group. It doesn't mean you have to become a ball group, but the reason that ball groups exist is simply because it's so effective to build like that. And building a group like that is no less strange than you probably running something like Rallying Cry and Wretched Vitality on your solo build at the time this video is released. After the previous segment, the question of why ball groups are so powerful should be easy to answer. Every player in a ball group is built to provide the maximum amount of utility to the group. This reflects in their choice of skills, which will mostly be AoE based, but also in their choice of sets. Ball groups extensively use support sets, which are sets that give a certain benefit to not just that player, but to the group as a whole. This could be extra armor, extra damage, extra sustain, extra healing, a specific buff, you name it. Examples of such sets include Spell Power Cure, Powerful Assault, Hircine's Veneer, Rallying Cry, Robes of Transmutation and Pillager's Prophet. Damage dealers will also wear sets like Vicious Death and Plague Break to ensure a chain reaction when they kill another player amid a group. To facilitate this, ball groups often use pull sets like Darkened Virgins and the soon-to-be nerfed Rush of Agony to stack enemy players up nicely. This means that ball group players likely have more damage, more healing and more sustain than you could ever obtain on a solo build or within a casual group. To put it in even clearer terms, 12 ball group players will be vastly statistically superior in every way that matters when compared to 12 solo players, no matter how well those 12 solo players have built. This has noticeable consequences for both their offense and their defense. On the offensive side, their ability to stack players and kill them with a domino effect of explosions makes it very difficult to survive a full ball group push, especially when you're standing next to players who only have 20k health. On the defensive side, the entire group puts out a huge amount of healing that makes it difficult to even put a dent in them. Even a ball group player temporarily separated from their group might still have vigors and regen sticking on them, meaning it's virtually impossible to gank them like you would a regular player. In short, their optimized setup makes it very difficult to get rid of a ball group without a group that operates by similar principles or a group that is significantly superior in numbers. As I said before, if you want to optimize your group play, it is likely that you will find yourself conforming, at least in part, to some of the core principles of ball grouping. So first and foremost, what ball groups want is simply to have fun in PvP and win as many encounters as possible. In this, they are no different from most other groups or individual players. However, ball groups do tend to behave in a different manner to more casual groups. I'm sure you've seen ball groups take a scroll, only instead of running it back to their alliance's base, they use it to bait fights with the enemy. Or they might be trying to take some faraway outpost while you are busy defending your home keeps. You might wonder, well, why aren't they running the scroll home when they have a clear chance to do so? Why are they not helping us defend our keeps? And indeed, this is often the source of tension in zone chat, but there's a very good reason as to why they are doing it. Because the ball group is so much more powerful than a casual group, they will need to use different tactics to find real challenges. Not all ball groups do this, and some are content to just Zerg surf, especially on an A, but from my experience, the higher end ball groups do go out of their way to find fights that put their carefully crafted group composition to the test. If you do like a casual group does and you just play the map and travel to the nearest keep that is under attack, you are unlikely to find such a challenge, because you will be going where most of the other players in your alliance are going, and if you roll over a bunch of players with a full Zerg behind you, it does not feel like an achievement. Whereas if you succeed in keeping an entire enemy alliance busy for half an hour with just 8 people because you attacked their home keep, that does feel like an achievement. Because if you make a mistake in that sort of situation, you will get punished. And it's in those types of situations where you can really learn who the better players are. Players who, despite the innumerable distractions, manage to stick to the crown, keep all their buffs up, do damage and or healing when they need to, and use their ultimates at the exact right moment. None of this would be visible if you were just steamrolling over a disorganized Zerg with your entire alliance on your wings. Here you could draw a comparison with PvE. Forming a ball group and just playing the map and helping out the Zerg would be the same as investing a lot of time in cooking up the perfect trial composition only to restrict yourself to normal trials. Sure, you would stomp everything in your path, but it's a default outcome that you don't have to break a sweat for. That is why, when you are doing your best to defend your home keep, the ball group is on the opposite side of the map. They want to avoid you. Well, not specifically you, but any allied players, because each allied player reduces the attractiveness of a fight. I've been in a small scale where we would not repair the doors of a freshly conquered keep, just so that the enemy could put it under attack again immediately. This prevented the resident Zerg guild from porting in and ruining the challenge we had been setting up for ourselves over the past 5 to 10 minutes. When a ball group takes a scroll to bait enemies, it is probably because they are having trouble provoking a proper fight by conventional means, such as attacking keeps or outposts. Basically, they are casting a huge beacon on the map that says, "Come here and fight us." This mentality is also why a lot of ball groups are not particularly loyal to their faction. If their faction grows too powerful, it makes it more difficult for them to find good fights. For example, to an AD ball group, there is no worse sight than a fully yellow map, as that means there are no interesting fights for them to have, and the raid can basically be cancelled. This should also help dispel one of the more popular misconceptions about ball groups, namely that they want to farm AP. Ball groups generally don't give a rat's ass about AP, they care about fights, and if the map isn't giving them fights, they'll do whatever it takes to get one. Whether that results in scroll baiting or changing alliances depends on situation, but the motivation is always the same. I'll take it one step further and say that if your ball group is not driven by the motivation to find challenge, it is destined to fail. It will either underperform compared to other ball groups, or it will disband entirely because people lose interest. I've both been involved in and privy to several projects by casual guilds who wanted to run a ball group alongside their regular group. These projects always fail because of 2 reasons. 1. If there is no experience in the group, it's unlikely to succeed because people try to reinvent the wheel and get frustrated when they don't immediately get the results they see other ball groups get. 2, and more relevant to our current point, they might play in a ball group formation, but if their mentality remains unchanged, they will not be rewarded. In other words, if you use your ball group to run alongside your regular casual group to play the map, it is unlikely you will derive any fun or reward from playing in that way, or even understand why others would run in such a formation. Without exception, I've seen all such projects fail not long after their inception. Does this mean that ball groups are useless to the Alliance and the campaign if you care about such things? Not really. As you will undoubtedly have experienced if you spent any time in Cyrodiil, ball groups are, above anything else, really good for keeping an alliance busy. When a ball group attacks a keep that is vital to your alliance, it's almost as if a protocol kicks in zone chat. People will complain about it at length. A few others might suggest just leaving them alone so they might get bored, and maybe some people are even sharing tactics, often bad ones I should add, to counter these groups. In short, the entire alliance goes through all stages of grief, and before you know it, an hour has passed. Note that this also applies to your enemy alliances when they are being attacked by a ball group that's on your side. If you're AD and you're defending Faragil against EP, it might frustrate you to learn that a ball group is all the way up at the EP home keep of King's Crest doing whatever it is they do. But you can use this to your advantage. The more EP are being harassed and kept busy in their own backyard, the fewer of them will bother reinforcing the siege at Faragil. Perhaps you not only defend your own keep successfully, but you might even be able to benefit by taking back some other key points further up the map. Sure, it doesn't always work out that perfectly from a tactical point of view, but remember that good ball groups are able to keep busy a significant amount of enemy players, and every player that's fighting them is not fighting you. And to all the faction loyalists and zone chat generals out there, every second spent complaining about allied ball groups in chat is a second you're not benefiting from their fight against the enemy. So if you see a ball group using a scroll to make an entire enemy alliance chase them, just stop worrying about the scroll quest and start taking back territory from that alliance. I full well realize that I'm generalizing about what motivates ball groups to play the way they do. Some of them do ride the waves of the Zerg, some of them don't want challenge, some of them do fight alongside other ball groups to compensate for their own lack of skill. But personally, I think such groups miss the point of playing in such a formation, or PvP in general, and you would be right to not respect them, because neither do I. So now that we know why ball groups play the way they do, let's delve into the individual motivations of players to play in such a group. Because there are many preconceived notions about this. I often hear things like people only play in ball groups because they are bad solo or in a small group, or that a player is bad because he was easily taken down once the rest of his ball group was dead. In reality, ball groups are no different from the rest of the PvP community, namely that there are good players and there are bad players. But there are several important things to note here. First of all, you cannot be a bad player but then be a good ball group player. The sequence of skills and tasks you're asked to perform may be different in a ball group than it would be in a normal group or solo, but they still require the player to be comfortable with the mechanics of the game, know the abilities and the limits of their build, and they also need to be able to time their skills close to perfection. Secondly, as we've previously established, every player in a ball group has built to accommodate the group. If you catch someone alone in their group build, it's likely they won't be able to put up a great fight, as they are not built for that situation. But make no mistake, some of those players might well delete you from existence on a solo build. Thirdly, and this is perhaps the most important one, players who play in a ball group seldom limit themselves to that composition. Some of the most accomplished solo players in the game can be seen playing in ball groups from time to time. And in general, there is a huge amount of crossover between small scale and ball group players. As I explained earlier, small scales and ball groups tend to operate by the same principles, at least in part, so the person you encounter in a format on a Friday night might be running with a ball group on a Saturday night, perhaps even using the exact same build. Taking myself as an example, I prefer to play in smaller groups of 4 to 6, as I find the impact of my contributions as a healer to be more noticeable. The bigger and more powerful the group is, the harder it is to find fights that are genuinely challenging. And yeah, I find 12 mans a bit boring in this way, because even if I don't perform well, it will barely be noticeable since there are maybe 4 other healers in the group. But sometimes that content is what's available to me and I enjoy running with that particular group. So then the challenge instead becomes seeing how my performance matches up to the other people in that group. And it's that challenge that motivates me when I'm playing in a ball group. Especially as a healer, my PvP experience depends to a large degree on other people. I healed casual groups for a long time, but I eventually figured that my presence did not really matter one way or the other. That's why small scales and certain ball groups are interesting to me, because I feel like I can make a difference with my presence. Everyone's motivation is different, and there might be players who would struggle functioning outside of a ball group. But usually, players who don't expand their horizons by at least testing the waters of small scaling or soloing are pretty easy to identify, as their reduced understanding of and experience with the game will reflect negatively in their performance when coming under pressure. An underlying assumption of the myth that people just play in ball groups because they can't cut it otherwise is the notion that it doesn't take any skill to play in one. I've already talked a bit about it being more difficult to find good fights as a ball group, and that the onus falls on a ball group to seek out proper challenges. So your mileage may vary in terms of just how challenging it is to play in a ball group. For instance, I've played in groups where we would limit the amount of signups to 8 people because a smaller group requires people to bring their A game instead of half-assing things in a full 12-man. When you have a ball group that's that committed to finding challenging fights, then it can be in fact very difficult to play in a ball group. Another myth I often hear is that ball group players only press 2 buttons. I'm not exactly sure where this idea comes from, but given that I've heard it from multiple players who had nothing to do with each other, it seems like a popular and widespread notion. My guess is that a lot of it has to do with the fact that you will typically only see the same 2 or 3 skills in your death recap when you get steamrolled by a ball group. But of course, that doesn't mean that those are the only skills they use. When you play in a ball group, you will typically be asked to keep juggling all skills and buffs at all times, resulting in a more complex and varied rotation than your typical player. For example, let me explain my rotation as a Sorc healer. First of all, I will need to keep Power Surge and Quick Cloak up at all times. I will also need to press Quick Cloak if I want a temporary speed boost. I will need to press Echoing Vigor twice per rotation if my group is bigger than 6 people. In order to keep the ticks going and make sure I cover everyone in a group, I typically recast Vigor every 7 or so seconds. I will also need to apply Radiating Regeneration once per 3 players per rotation. So if I am in a full group, that means 4 times per rotation. Then I will need to press Blessing of Restoration whenever I see or anticipate an enemy push, making sure my range covers all of my teammates while I myself am standing outside of the direct damage point. I will also need to cast an orb in every cooldown phase and also during every damage phase if I am running the damage orb. I use Streak to either reposition myself or to stun a group of players that my DDs cannot cover. I also need to keep making decisions regarding which ultimate I will use and time it accordingly, which in turn requires me to keep an eye on the ultimate availability of my teammates. Finally, since nowadays I'm often running Spell Power Cure on my back bar, I need to make sure that I'm on that bar at least once every 4 or so seconds in order to reapply Major Courage to the group. This requires constant bar swapping during a fight. That in itself sounds doable, but also realize that when we are talking about huts and buffs, ball group players are expected to keep near perfect uptimes. I am usually not satisfied until both my Vigor and Regen uptimes are well above 90% across a run of 2 hours or more. It is difficult to quantify or qualify the skill that is required to play in a certain way, but when you look at the uptimes and the sense of timing required when playing in a ball group, it clearly asks more of the player than casual gameplay. In fact, if you are on PC, there's a pretty easy way to see this. If you are in a casual group and you want to find a player with ballgroup experience, all you need to do is run logs and go to the cast per minute tab. And odds are they'll have twice the amount of inputs that the second player has. They will probably also have vastly outperformed all other players in their chosen role, so healing or damage. You can also notice the difference the other way around. If you take a random player that is good at what they do, but only has experience with casual gameplay, and you put them into a ball group, you will notice it in their performance. They will die more, heal less, deal less damage, and generally just have a harder time performing up to standard. The players who are naturally gifted at these sorts of things will be assimilated into the ball group and or small scale community pretty quickly. Just to zoom out a bit, if ball group gameplay did not require skill, it would mean that you could take any random player, put them in a ball group and watch them perform. or that you could give a group a full guide as to what sets and skills to use and watch them reach similar effectiveness to an experienced ball group after a few runs. As someone who has been involved in several startup ball group projects, I can assure you this is not the case, and we'd often spend months to even get these inexperienced players up to a standard that was borderline passable, but would still get them kicked out of most established ball groups. And that is not meant to sound boastful. Rather, it is further evidence that in order to do well in a ball group, you do actually need a particular set of skills. So, is there anything that can be done against ball groups? Sure there is. There are several methods currently available that can hurt ball groups a lot. Examples include the Azure Blight set as well as Siege. However, I don't want to get into these too deeply, as the best method to counter ball groups varies per patch, and with a scribing system on the horizon, both the nature of how ball groups operate and their weaknesses might change dramatically. And I would prefer the information in this video to have a little more permanence than just the current patch. In general, the best way to counter ball groups when you're alone is to just not fight them. As we've established, ball groups tend to be optimized orbs of damage and healing, so as a singular player, there is not much you can do against them, unless the ball group is bad or you have a specific tactic. In the past, you'd be able to wipe a ball group solo by sieging them while wearing Elfbane and Vicious Death, but that no longer works. So unless you have a solid plan to counter them or catch them off guard, I just wouldn't bother with them. Except if you're either part of a strong small scale or ball group yourself, or your faction outnumbers the group to such an extent that it's feasible to overwhelm them. Even then, start out by analyzing their movement. Where do they push? What skills do they use while pushing? How much time is there in between pushes? What choke points do they use to funnel enemy players through? Once you start noticing these patterns, because they are very much patterns, it becomes easier to at least avoid death while fighting them. That doesn't mean you'll necessarily beat them, but even the act of dying against them can already motivate the group to stay in your keep just that little while longer. Once their kills dry up, they will go somewhere else, so don't prolong the problem by feeding them. The more players recognize their attack patterns, the more difficult it becomes for the ball group to keep waltzing over players by the dozens. You are still free to hate ball groups. I once did, but as I got more into group play, I realized that ball grouping did give me certain benefits that casual play wasn't giving me. Provided I am with the right guild, I find more challenge, more satisfaction, and just more action in general while playing with a ball group. Overall, these experiences helped me to become a better player, even if I still prefer small scaling at the end of the day. That's perhaps the only real advice I can give you. Expand your horizons a bit. Apply to a ball group and try to play with them for a campaign or so. Not all of them have high barriers of entry, and even if you end up hating the experience, you will at least have some more PvP experience under your belt, as well as more knowledge on how to avoid falling prey to these groups in Cyrodiil. From personal experience, I find that many of the people who complain the loudest about ball groupers being a bunch of skillless no-lifers who cheat and ruin the campaign have themselves never experienced any variation in their gameplay. People who've just been playing for the campaign since beta, who never really cared to improve any aspect of their gameplay. And look, I'm fine with people playing like that. Just don't listen to such players and instead form your own view on ball groups. And if at the end of the day you still hate them with passion, that is fine, but at least you went through the effort of trying to understand the phenomenon. And that already makes you a much more mature player than the zone chat generals crying about everyone who does not play the game according to their own narrow vision. I hope you found this video informative, and maybe you'll see me out there on the battlefield, spamming just 2 buttons like there's no tomorrow.